it's only getting,
Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. Your commitment to advancing mental health care is truly inspiring. At Iconotes, we're passionate about providing mental health professionals like you with the most clinically robust and intuitive mental health care software available. From psychiatrists to therapists, nurse practitioners to social workers, Iconotes offers a comprehensive solution tailored to your practice's needs. With Iconotes, you can write a flawless note in less than 3 minutes, and without typing a single word. Iconotes was designed specifically to help mental health professionals write comprehensive notes quickly. Iconotes also provides a complete practice management solution with user-friendly scheduling, secure document management, HIPAA-compliant messaging, a certified patient portal, and more, so you can spend less time on paperwork and more time helping your patients. Try us free at iconotes.com/try-us.
All right. How is everyone doing today? Thank you so much for joining the webinar. My name is October Boyles, and I am so excited to have you here. I am the Chief Clinical Officer with Iconotes, and we have a fantastic webinar here for you today. I want to go ahead and introduce Kaylee. Kaylee is an absolutely wonderful speaker, so you guys are in for an exceptional treat today. And I see that a lot of people are typing in the chat where you're from. Please feel free to do that. We love to hear where everyone is from. It looks like I see people from Texas and Georgia and Sacramento. Weather there sounds phenomenal. From Pennsylvania, Oregon, New York City, fantastic. Appalachia, Ohio, great to have you. South Carolina, Georgia, some people from North Carolina. It's great to have you there. I am in North Carolina, Pawleys Island. It is exceptional to have you guys here today. If you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat, I'd love for you to do it. If you feel comfortable, what your discipline is, because we have a lot of folks in this webinar today. So I'd love to get your discipline, because Kaylee kind of speaks towards that, and I think that's wonderful. Is this session closed captioned? You know what? I don't know. We're going to try to make it closed caption. Angela's on the back end. But what I will tell you before we get started is you will get a video recording of today's webinar. So if you have to, if for some reason, like you have a patient come in or you are starving for lunch or whatever that thing is, and if you need to leave, that is not a problem. We are going to go ahead and have this sent to you. So I've got a lot of folks, LPCs, LCSWs, LMSWs, fantastic nurse practitioners, school psychologists, clinical social workers, psychiatry. Excellent to have you. School-based therapists. Excellent to have you guys here today. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining with us. All right. So we have just, what I will tell you, and I'm super excited to introduce Kaylee. She is a licensed master social worker and certified grief counselor. She has extensive experience with supporting individuals throughout their grief journey. And she has worked as a grief counselor at a nonprofit hospice. Hospice is close to my heart, y'all. I used to be a hospice nurse. It's very close to my heart. And she has dedicated her life to helping and guiding through people through some of the most difficult and challenging moments of their life. Kaylee is an accomplished author. She's absolutely a fantastic speaker. She's an event organizer, and she likes to create spaces where grief can be acknowledged and processed and absolutely honored. So, and her work has been featured in various media outlets. We've got podcasts, magazines, all trying to amplify that conversation around grief and bring it into the public sphere. And so, again, we are very, very fortunate to have her. And she is a certified grief counselor through the American Institute for Health Professionals. So please give a warm welcome for Kaylee.
Thanks so much, October. It's such a lovely to hear your voice and have you introduce me as a fellow hospice alumni. I appreciate you for being here. I also see that somebody came to the chat letting us know that they're a professor at Boise State University, which is where I got my master's degree in social work. So Welcome, Amy. So thankful to have you here as well. I want to just take a second to acknowledge that this is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And this is a month, I think, that is very close to many of our hearts as clinicians. I see many of us are here as clinicians, as LPCs, LMFTs, LMSWs, all of the letters. And we are not immune to both experiencing clients who come to us with suicidal ideation, thoughts around suicide, and are kind of on that cusp of, is this something I need to assess? And additionally, on the other end, we are not immune to having experienced clients, people in our sphere who have either attempted or been successful in suicide. And I just want to hold space for that. I personally have been impacted by suicide. My teacher, my mentor in my master's program, unfortunately ended his life by suicide in 2020. And so this is a topic that I choose to speak on because I think it is so important, and I want to hold space for, regardless of how fabulous you are in every part of your field, of your specific chosen discipline, suicide prevention is what we need to know, regardless of who we're working with. And I just want to speak to that and really hold space for the topic that we're having today. So as October mentioned, I have been a grief counselor for about a decade, a little over a decade, and suicide is something that comes up in my practice on a very regular basis, not active suicide, of course. But within any grief situation, we have a lot of passive suicidal ideation. We have people who wonder, do I even want to be here anymore? And that really, as a grief counselor, is concerning, but also a part of what grief is. It's a part of the natural, normal grief process. And so I spend a lot of my practice holding space for the duality of grieving and allowing those emotions to be naturally felt of, do I want to be here in the absence of my loved one, while also making sure I was keeping my clients safe, because that is the apex of our role. And additionally, I did my internship in my master's program. One of my most fabulous learnings was, again, with my mentor. We did designated examinations on adults with severe and persistent mental illness. And so what our job was to go and do assessments on individuals who were taken into the emergency room, into the inpatient hospital setting, and were being held on a 24-hour hold because they showed themselves to be a danger to themselves or others. And so we would do very acute suicide risk assessments on those populations to check to see if we were able to allow them to leave the hospital or if we had to put them on a hold, which was a really hard choice to make as a clinician, as somebody who believes in patient rights, autonomy. In essence, that process is taking a person's rights away to make choices for themselves and putting them in a hospital setting and keeping them until they are in a stabilized place to make decisions in a more well space. So my experience with suicide is a wide spectrum, and that's really why I wanted to speak to the full spectrum of suicidality today, because I think we think about suicide and we sometimes go all the way to the extreme when a client comes in and they say, I am going to kill myself. I have a plan. I know what I'm doing. And that is a scary moment for, I think, any clinician. Nobody wants to lose a client to suicide. Nobody. And unfortunately, it does happen. But I think that there's also times within that spectrum that we want to pay attention to how we intervene with those individuals, and all individuals. Some who have passive suicidal ideation may never get to an active attempt. And that is great. And that is a testament of a multitude of reasons, including their decision-making, but also the care that you provide throughout that process and at each stage. And so I really want to just kind of give room for the idea that we can intervene at any point in time and make a lasting difference on our clients within suicide prevention. Suicide is preventable, and it is unfortunately so common and increasing in our world. So today for our agenda, we are going to work to understand what the spectrum of suicide is, from ideation to attempt. We'll kind of unpack that a little bit, identify warning signs and risk factors, and then explore evidence-based interventions. And I'm so sorry, I want to go back to the poll, but now I'm not sure how to get there. I closed the chat. Oh, there we go. All right, I have some polls within, so just to kind of set a baseline for how are we all feeling about the topic. So I'm going to post this poll. How comfortable are you in general in supporting somebody who is at risk for suicide? I'd love to know kind of like what is our baseline, and please be honest, this is totally anonymous, so feel free. I think in my early practice, I was very uncomfortable, and I was very lucky to have the educational experiences that put me in a really hard, like down in the deep of suicide intervention. And so I want to just hold space for this is not, I mean, it's covered in a lot of our programs. And yet when we have somebody in our session, it can be really hard. Thank you for all these answers. Somewhat comfortable is a great place to be. Somewhat uncomfortable is fair. I think a little bit of discomfort around suicide is okay. Thank you. Thank you all so much for answering. And it sounds like we have a lot of people in here that feel pretty good. The ones who feel pretty good, I would love your feedback at the end, and also give me some Q&A. Put some questions in the chat of what are you really hoping to have a question answered in regard to this, and hopefully we'll get to it by the end. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to keep the chat open so I don't lose that again. I also wanted to call out that there will be, there are handouts located in the chat and Q&A tab. So I personally looked through these resources that were developed by the iKnotes team, and they're incredible. The toolkit is a really comprehensive kit that you could honestly probably give to an adult client, and they could learn how to kind of do this suicide prevention for themselves, but also in tandem with you as the professional. It has risk assessments, it has safety plans, it kind of has a full packet on like changing a CBT model of changing those rough thoughts and reframing. So overall, it's a great downloadable and great printable. I would highly recommend that. So I want to just give a brief overview of suicidality. I know that a lot of us come to this session with some good background. And so we have suicide. Over 700,000 people die a year by suicide. And I think that number is on the rise. There is so much hard stuff going on in the world. There's highest rates of poverty, highest rates of unemployment. And we're going to talk about those biopsychosocial risk factors that impact that. But when we think about why is suicide on the rise, we can look out to the world and see people are really struggling. The suicide is the 10th leading cause of death, with approximately 48,000 deaths in the US alone. And for each suicide, we have about 25 suicide attempts. So when you think about that, that's exponential. I also want to speak to populations at the highest risk for suicide. I woke up this morning just feeling really called to speak on this a little bit, and wondering if you could, in the chat, let me know, what populations are you working with? I think, we obviously have these high risk groups, but everyone, no one is immune to suicide risk. And I think that's a really important thing to call out. But if you feel comfortable, let me know what population you work with. But really to speak to, veterans, thank you, Christina, for the work that you do. My heart. We have youth and adolescents. They are at a high risk as a result of a number of factors. I mean, you think about the age 15 to 25, which is really what we're looking at, and all of the changes that are going on in their world and in their minds, in their family systems. We also have academic pressures, bullying, the internet, which I don't know if any of you are aware, but the COSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, was just passed, which is a big attempt to kind of help protect children online as well from online bullying and messaging that is really harmful. I am also seeing, individuals with chronic illness. Thank you for that. Children through adult, full spectrum. Thank you. Thank you all for I love to see a really wide variety of specialties and focuses. I personally, coming from a hospice background, veterans and the elderly have a very, very special, deep place in my heart. But working with children and adolescents, thank you. Thank you. Intimate partner violence and child abuse. Georgia, please come to our next webinar we will be having on intimate partner violence in narcissist abuse. So we also have the LGBTQ and youth. When we think about like that intersection of youth and adolescence and what everyone in that population is already experiencing, but you add the fact that they are LGBTQ on there, we have a significantly higher rates of suicide, which is very, very sad. Middle-aged adults, this kind of seems really interesting, but it's really, when you think about the life stressors going on, when you're kind of in that middle age, you're not where you thought you would be, and you have all these societal pressures to kind of fit into a box, and we typically don't. The elderly, age 65 plus, and specifically men, 85 and older, are at the highest risk within that population. I will always speak to the very high risk of suicide for veterans and military personnel, for the work that they do to protect us. It is very difficult to know that they are 1.5 times higher at risk for suicide than the general population as a result of what they experience, what they witness, what they're asked to do, and the lack of mental health services or the availability of mental health services. I know we're here, we work with veterans, and just holding space for, there's never enough care. The Indigenous population, I really do want to speak to that, specifically around Native American in the US, Canada, and Australia, as well as Alaska Natives. So that population is at a very high risk as a result of historical trauma, poverty, lack of access to care. Individuals with mental health disorders, we know that about 90% of people who die have a diagnosed mental health disorder. And so they are absolutely at highest risk. Incarcerated and recently released individuals, when you think about as they're exiting the prison system, the things that they've experienced, and the minus 10 points they have coming into this world, and the trajectory of like the possibilities for their life can feel really bleak for them. People with chronic illness and disabilities, I know we have some people here who work in that population, and chronic pain can be a huge risk factor for suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. Men in general, we have, they are the number one when we look at across the board gender. Men are the highest risk, and they will use the most lethal means. Really thinking about why that is, we can look at the cultural stigma that we put on men around expressing emotions, and getting the support that you need. They are less likely to do that, and so they will suffer alone. And then survivors of suicide loss, we also know that people who have lost a loved one to suicide are also at a high risk, which is absolutely devastating. And working in hospice and bereavement, specifically community grief, I experienced a lot of family members who had lost a loved one to suicide, and that is a heartbreaking journey. And so just extra special attention needs to be paid to this group. Take a sip of water. So as we're talking about the spectrum of suicide, I kind of needed to break it down into 3 separate parts, because I think even within these separate parts, there's nuance, and I want to always hold space for nuance. But the first kind of mark on the spectrum, the lowest acuity, is passive suicidal ideation. And again, I speak to that as somebody who has, in most sessions of grief, worked with individuals who just kind of were wondering if there was any point to being in this world anymore as a result of their loved one being gone. And this is no plan is in place. They don't have a realistic picture of dying, but they are kind of wondering about the potential to not exist anymore, to not live in this world. But that connection of, okay, killing yourself is not quite there. And if that conversation were to evolve, they'd be like, whoa, they would be surprised by it. Because even when you're in passive suicidal ideation, that kind of general wishing is there, but that action part just lacks overall. Active suicidal ideation, on the other hand, is that next marker where they are thinking about what it would be like to not be here anymore, and also adding that, how would I go about ending my life? They have a method, they have a plan they've thought through, potentially they've done some research around that. And then, of course, we have suicide attempt. These are the individuals that they have intended to end their life, meaning that they participated in an action with the intention to die. And then finally, when we talk about the spectrum, there is a progression. And as I mentioned, not everyone who experiences passive suicidal ideation is going to go through with an attempt, but there are interventions along that road that often help people take pause, and really pay attention to where they're at and find the supports they need within whatever part of the spectrum that they are in. Suicide risk factors. So we have a biopsychosocial. There is likely never one thing that instigates suicidal attempts. There is a collection of reasons that often kind of build upon each other. So when we look at psychological risk factors, we have people, as I mentioned, who have a diagnosed mental health condition, are at a very high risk, or they're more likely to die by suicide. Depression, anxiety, personality disorders, and trauma. And also if they have a history of previous attempts or self-harm. So if there's somebody who already kind of has a baseline of some struggles with their mental health, that would be a marker right there. The next is social and environmental factors. What we know, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Surgeon General's latest reading on the loneliness epidemic. We have overarchingly, our culture is lonelier than ever, and it is that social isolation and not feeling connected to our community is a very, very big indicator of suicidality. So when we look at, when we're assessing, we need to look at how connected are they? Do they have memberships? Do they have affiliations? Do they have groups that they feel like they belong to? And then we also want to look at what is going on in their life that could be increasing their feelings and their risk of suicide. So have they just lost their job? Are they struggling to buy food for themselves and their family? Are they going through a divorce, a relationship rupture? What is going on that's kind of changed in a very negative way that might click them into that track of potential suicidality? And then finally, looking at environmental factors. Do they have ready access to lethal means? This can mean, is there a gun in the house? Do they have medications in their cabinets that could assist with that suicidal attempt? So you really want to look at, would there be any pause to an active attempt, meaning they need to go out and purchase or get or procure the means to kill themselves. That is actually a mitigating factor. So if they have to stop and pause, that is good. A lock on their guns, that is also helpful. Biological risk factors, we do know that there can be genetic predispositions, but also when we look at chronic illness and substance abuse, those can absolutely increase the risk factors for suicide. As I previously noted, people who live with chronic pain, it is very different to have a chronic illness than to be sick or injured for a period of time, because with chronic illness, the baseline is just different, and living with pain is something that they have to commit to every single day, and it's very, very difficult. So we have warning signs of suicidality. Wanted to look at the different parts of the spectrum. And again, just kind of looking at that passive suicidal ideation. What it looks like is really kind of withdrawing. It's very casual. It looks very like, oh, they didn't show up. And then they didn't show up again. And it doesn't feel alarming. But it is worth noting that they will just kind of start isolating themselves. So also expressing feelings of hopelessness to people who would listen, family, friends. And if those people exist in their world, they will likely start communicating those things of like, I just don't care that much anymore. They won't really invest in advancing, furthering, improving their life circumstances. They just kind of, they look as if they're kind of giving up in general. Active suicidal ideation, these people are talking about wanting to die. They are very exhibiting potentially very moody behavior. They are already not engaging in the world. So if you think about kind of these different portions of the spectrum, they kind of build upon each other. So they also have withdrawn. They are not investing in life moving forward, etc. And so then when you layer active on top of that immediate risk, they are exhibiting all those signs plus gathering means. How are they going to die by suicide? Finalizing their affairs, saying goodbye to people, kind of having these very potentially meaningful goodbye conversations that feel very odd to loved ones because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's a warning bell. And then, just remembering that if there is firearms in the home, that will increase the risk of suicide, again, because when someone has to pause and go and like collect the things in order to end their life, that helps them kind of think through their choice. I'm going to put out another poll. I want to know, kind of as we're navigating through the remainder of this, what are your biggest challenges that you face when supporting a client with existing suicidal ideation? I'm not seeing any responses, so feel free to give it time. Lack of confidence, lack of resources and referrals. Thank you for that. I think, a huge difficulty as a clinician is not knowing who is equipped and who to send your clients to that you care very deeply about, but potentially that this just isn't in your wheelhouse to help kind of with that long-term intervention. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Navigating confidentiality concerns, I can definitely speak to that. When we're having this when we have a relationship with our client, this therapeutic relationship, it is built on trust. It is built on confidentiality. And unfortunately, when they potentially begin to speak on hurting themselves, you have to breach that. And that is very, very difficult. And we think about the long-term impact of the relationship the impact on the relationship we have with our clients, that can be very, very difficult. While keeping in mind, and we all know this, that we can't have a relationship with our client if they die by suicide. And so it's of most importance to get them the help they need. And then if unfortunately they don't trust you after that, then you made the right choice because they're alive to not trust you. So hard. Thank you all for sharing that. I wanted to also share some tools. I think we're looking at limited resources and referrals. I think one of the resources we can provide is a wealth of intervention or assessment tools. And I think that's really, really helpful because, again, and I always speak to this in every single webinar, that one tool is not going to work for every person and every clinician. And so just being kind of aware of the tools available and having them at your disposal depending on your client and what's going to work best for them. There's ones that are very brief. So the brief suicide safety assessment is just kind of a super overview, feels very light. Almost clients don't realize that it's happening versus, the PHQ-9 is a little bit deeper. And then we go into the ASQ. That is for, you need to know right now if they're going to die or if they have a plan to die. And so it kind of goes by like, where are they within the spectrum? And then pairing the assessment tool with where they're at. So I cannot speak enough to clarity of language. And I think that it's very, very uncomfortable to speak in a way that is clear and helpful to our clients who are potentially at risk for suicide. Over time, we have, with suicide, with grief, with death, we like to talk around. And that is not helpful. And I think removing nuance from suicide risk assessments is very, very important. And so there are many tools that say, ask, do you ever not want to be here anymore? Do you ever want to harm yourself, hurt yourself? And those questions kind of leave room for ambiguity, because when somebody is actively suicidal, they may not think that killing themselves is hurting themselves. They might see that as a relief from the pain that they're currently feeling. And so when we're assessing for suicide, we really want to use very deeply clear language. Have you had thoughts of killing yourself? Do you have a plan? And how would you do it? Do you have means to carry out that plan? It feels harsh. It feels it feels too direct. But in the lack of directness, there is nuance. And there is space for a client to talk around, potentially not tell the truth. They may not tell you the truth regardless. But if you can remove any barriers to that communication, using soft language in these assessments is not helpful. And so just making sure that you are being as clear as possible when you are doing these assessments. I also want to speak to the intervention strategies for the different parts of this spectrum. So when we're looking at someone with passive suicidal ideation, we have a lot more room. We have more time. We have the ability to really have an open conversation to build that bond if they're a new client, if they're an existing client, just really continuing to build that rapport and that deep relationship so that that trust is there. When we're having open conversations and not directing, it's easier for clients to share how they're really feeling, and they'll go deeper. Psychoeducation for these clients of, okay, it sounds like you're feeling hopeless. It sounds like you're feeling like things aren't going well, and that they might not go well for a long time. Let's talk through problem solving. How do you work through those feelings of hopelessness in a way that help pull you out of that feeling? Because we don't want to live in a hopeless state. We also don't want to demonize that hopeless state. We want to validate how they're feeling, because we all feel hopeless from time to time. But how do we work around that, and how do we make sure that there are resources, connections, family and friends available? How are we making sure that they are re-engaging, plugging back in, so that they don't fall into the next part of the spectrum? So when we have somebody who has active suicidal ideation, our time is more limited. We don't have the luxury of being able to spend a lot of time really building relationship with them, because that's not always going to be the thing that saves them. It's not going to be the thing that brings them back from those feelings. So we have the need for immediate safety planning with these individuals. I think that there's always, so much to be said for that therapeutic relationship. And if this is a client that you have seen for a long time, you're already building on top of that. And that is so important to remember. But a safety plan it's a social contract that we create with our clients. And in some ways it kind of feels like, well, what's that going to do? To write down. Of course they know all of these things, but when you are in such a state of crisis and feeling like you want to die, this very clear how to stay alive guide and a promise to your therapist does help. We want to make sure that within that safety plan, we are identifying social supports outside of just you as the therapist, as the clinician, wanting to make sure that they know at least 3 people that they can call who will answer the phone and who will connect with them in a way that is helpful. And that's not everybody, that's not every family member, but it is, we hope to have at least 3 people. We also want to make sure that we are removing any access to them being able to die. So if there are pills, if there are weapons, making sure that those means are removed from the house as much as possible. If that means putting them in a safe because a family member owns them, that needs to be done. And it saves lives. That pause. I know in my community we have I live in a rural red state, and so there are guns all over the place. And we have events at the fair that just give away locks, like gun locks and safes, and it's incredible, and it's an incredible way to save lives. And lastly, involving close family and friends. So this is not a time when you want to kind of allow the conversation to really be between the two of you. If you are able to help your client reach out and connect with their social supports, that will support them in clicking back in choosing to stay and choosing not to die. And we just know that, and all of that is done within the safety plan. And we know that we can reduce suicide by 50% with safety plans, which I think at the end of the day is a great amount that we can reduce. And finally, immediate risk attempts, even less time. It is an emergency situation and it should be treated as such. If you have a client in your office and they say, I'm going to die, this is my plan, and I'm going to do it, there isn't space for not taking that seriously, I suppose is the best way to say that. Take every single risk attempt very, very seriously and engage emergency medical intervention immediately. When I spoke about the designated examinations I did, many of those came from clinicians in our community who sent their clients to the emergency hospital. And it was hard on them. It was hard on the therapeutic relationship. It was hard on the person, but it kept them alive. There is not, there's not safety planning at this point. This is emergency, get everyone on board, and help your client get to the hospital. We also always want to make sure that following a situation like that, that there is post-crisis follow-up care, whether that is through you or if you cannot salvage that therapeutic relationship, it's by somebody else that you trust. It's somebody you refer them to potentially, to make sure that they're engaging in care that is going to support them in choosing to stay moving forward as soon as they're medically stabilized. I also want to speak to some of the therapeutic modalities and interventions that we can use through suicide prevention. We, of course, have cognitive behavioral therapy. I think that this modality is used in so many cases, but really when we're talking about suicidal thoughts, when we really break down CBT, we change our thoughts, we change our cognition, we change our thoughts, and we change our behaviors, and that is a remapping of how they are viewing the world and the choices they're making and the investment in their lives and their relationships. And that can really help address those negative thought patterns that lead them to feeling so hopeless that they are making a choice to die. And then we also have DBT, which, we focus on distress tolerance within that. And a person who is actively suicidal is distressed in a form of feeling existential pain, hopelessness, not wanting to invest. And that is very uncomfortable. They're not feeling connected. And using DBT as a way to kind of help them sit with that, regulate their emotions, and then finding a solution, that's very tangible. That's very immediate that you can do to support that person. And then finally, we have crisis intervention. There are many, many resources. If you, again, go to that toolkit that's been provided, there is a huge list of resources for all kinds of populations. Please use that. I saw that many of us feel that there are limited resources. This is a resource for you. So make sure that you are reviewing that and kind of keeping that printed out so that you can potentially give it to your client, or make sure that you're at least referring them to the one that applies to them. But we do have 24/7 crisis helplines, thankfully, through 988. It's a brand new service. I mean, it's not brand new, but it is. When it first launched, it wasn't everywhere, but I believe it's everywhere now. But please correct me if I'm wrong. And also emergency room interventions. And again, that is the work that I did with designated examinations. Also, crisis intervention through building a crisis plan. This is a safety plan, of course, but can also include emergency contacts, supportive activities, removing lethal means. This and all of the above is helpful for when they are in crisis. And then follow-ups. I think it can be easy to hope that when a client comes back and things seem to be resolved, that isn't something that needs to be addressed again. And that's almost like counterintuitive, because we want to make sure that even when they're in a good place, we're helping them build the tools that they need to feel confident in staying alive long term. So making sure that you're not only working with them, but their family, and then helping them engage in social activities. The best way to support a client who has experienced suicidal ideation is to get them connected, set them up with clubs, groups, memberships, make sure people are counting on them. And that's really going to support them choosing to stay, because once you feel like you have a sense of responsibility to stay, it will interrupt that feeling. I think we did just talk about this, but in review, addressing risk factors and early intervention. So when we're looking at that very early stage of ideation, passive, What can we do? Again, connection. It's the best I can say. It's the best tool we can use. And it's less about us. It's more about community care. And then, of course, we can always work on a global scale to reduce stigma and make sure that, we're talking about suicide and we're destigmatizing even the conversation around it, because there's more people who experience suicidal ideation than I think we realize, or the general population realizes. When we're looking at post-intervention for suicide attempts, we have mental health follow-ups, of course. This ongoing therapy and reviewing the safety plan just to continue to check in and say like, hey, I want to make sure we're still on the same page. I want to make sure that this safety plan still applies to where you are today. Why don't we do some updates? Feels more casual, but it also keeps that safety plan at the front of their mind. And we also want to make sure that if, unfortunately, worst case scenario, we lose a client, or we lose somebody in the community, that we are reaching out and supporting friends and family who are impacted by a suicide. We know that people are at higher risk when they have someone in their lives who have died by suicide. But aside from that, there is incredible grief and trauma, guilt that is experienced by individuals who lose a loved one by suicide. And that is very, very long-term supportive care that is needed. It is a very acute type of grief. And I would encourage any and all of you to get more training on how to support survivors of suicide. And again, I think this is a repeat. I also wanted to give a couple resources that are my personal favorite. I will call out specifically, I think many of these you already know, but two you may not be familiar with. Only 7 Seconds is a nonprofit that I work very closely with. They are on a mission to end loneliness. And they specifically focus on youth. At the moment, they do the most incredible in-school curriculum that teaches youth empathy and connection. And so it kind of like hits loneliness right at the core, and make sure that youth specifically who are at very high risk for suicide do not feel lonely and know how to support each other relationally. It's very, very beautiful. I encourage you to look into that organization, as well as Robbie's Hope. It is a teen-run suicide prevention organization. It is also national, so it supports teens nationally and has toolkits. It has social media kits. They have a lot of resources and curriculum that you can call upon for just further intervention for if you're working with teens. And I think that's it. We, I believe, are going to have either a demo or a video just to play so that I can kind of sift through the questions. Angela, can you let me know if we're going to have a presentation or a video?
I'll save the video till you're done with the Q&A. October is having internet issues, so I'll run that when you're done.
Okay, great. So give me a second. I'm going to look at the questions because I've been trying to be very present here.
But I think, can you hear me okay? Because my internet is a little bit bouncy right now. You hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move away for a second. I'm going to actually take off the slides and I'm going to show the presentation. So give me just a moment to do that. Let's see. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you'll start to see my screen in just a moment. So give me just one sec here. And Kaylee, thank you. You did an absolutely fantastic job. So I did see some questions regarding apps. So I want to address those really quickly. The apps that people are looking for, there is a couple of them. One is Suicide Safety Plan. And that's a really good app that gives it's a way to create a personalized safety plan. And another one is just called Safety Plan. So, and it gives personal warnings and strategies. There is a Not Okay app. that I think is, if you look up the history of that one, that is a really good app. It was a young lady that came up with it. Her and her brother went on a mission to create this app saying, like, I'm not okay. And with just a tap of a button, they can reach out to individuals within their network. So I really like that one. And so I really, really encourage that one. Give me just one moment here. Okay, so we're going to go here, and you should start to see my screen. Is everybody seeing Icanotes? Can you give me a verbal yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So this is Icanotes Plus. So if you're a current Icanotes user, you're probably like, my screen doesn't necessarily look like this. This is the new UI. It's very pretty. And we'll just go into a patient's chart. I can go into everybody's charts or just charts assigned to me. And what I'll do, let's go into Dexter Morgan's chart. Why not? For fun. Okay, there's Dexter. So we have case management notes within Icanotes. We have couples family therapy. We have quick notes, which are really great for like no shows and documenting maybe collaboration that you're getting from the family or collateral. And then there is the SOAP note, and we also have clinical summaries, and we have lots of forms and assessments. We also have within this a safety plan for your folks to fill out. So I think that's really important that you can have the safety plan right in your EMR. But I'm going to run through a progress note, and we'll click on that. It'll take me directly into a progress note. The great thing about Icanotes is different than other systems out there, especially like AI that listen to your session. A lot of people are not very fond of that. So what I can go into with Icanotes is the client has symptoms of, and we will talk about depression. So maybe they're having depression, and that depression is present and it's chronic. I can talk about how long it lasts. If it's episodic, I can address that. I'm going to say that there are crying spells, and that symptom is definitely present. There's fatigue, and that's maybe about the same. There's irritability, and perhaps irritability is a little bit better there. We can talk about sleep problems, school, if you're dealing with young ones, school misconduct. I can address feelings of worthlessness and say that that's present. And then we're going to address suicidality. And one thing that is really important in my background is I am the Chief Clinical and Compliance Officer with Icanotes. Many, many years ago, I worked for a large law firm in the Southeast. We protected clinicians. It wasn't like you could call us to sue clinicians or hospitals. We protected clinicians and hospitals and mental health. And so one of the important things about that, and I added this in here, is not only do you need to document that they're not suicidal, that their denial is convincing to you. Not that they just said that I'm not suicidal, that their denial was convincing. So that's a really important piece in there. You could talk about if they wish to be dead, if the denial is convincing for that or not convincing, or if they have ideas and intentions. We need to know if that plan is specific, if it's clear intention to suicide or not intention to suicide, or if they have plans, if that plan is really specific. Are we talking about they're minimizing suicidal ideas, they're guarded about the suicidal ideas, or their suicidal ideas are fleeting? And then most importantly, do they have access to a firearm or not? And I'm going to say no. So Dexter does not have access to a firearm. We could talk about behavior a little bit. I could say maybe Dexter's self-care is reduced. I can say his social behavior is isolated. His functioning at work is really impaired or almost forced. Maybe his substance use is more than advised. We can talk about anger and impulses with Dexter. We can talk about his sleep. Maybe he has sleep problems, falling asleep and staying asleep. We can also talk about verbal content, what we're talking about. Maybe Dexter is having problems with a relationship. And maybe there's feelings of depression and maybe low self-esteem. And then what we're going to do for that with Dexter. So our session goal is that we definitely want coping skills. We want to improve self-esteem. And then our interventions here, we want to support him and encourage him to vent his feelings. If we have a mental status exam on Dexter, we can go through each element of the mental status exam so you have a full and complete one. And I can also say that it is normal if I want. If we're having normal feelings, it gives me a complete normal mental status exam. I can pull in rating scales. Let's say we had Dexter do a PHQ-9 when he was in the office, and he scored mild there. So maybe a 7. This will track scores on that. So it's great. We have our suicide violence risk assessment. If you're having trouble getting sessions, or you need, maybe they need a higher level of care, we can talk about justify level in care. Maybe says outpatient still needed because it's interfering with day-to-day activities, and Dexter requires continue treatment. We do have play therapy in here. We do have EMDR, and I can also link in treatment plans. So if I've created a Dexter treatment plan, I can link in that treatment plan. We've got depression. I can select from that list, and I can also select my interventions there and pull them right down into here. So I'm able to do that without any problems whatsoever, and it pulls into the treatment plan. So, and then I can compile that note and preview it. Of course, I can put my time spent without any issues. We have custom buttons. And so, and then it will look like, and of course, if somebody's asking in private chat, can you type in this? Absolutely. Every area that's yellow, you can type into, and it looks like I have a beautiful note that will hold up in an audit, and then I can electronically sign it, and it goes in Dexter's charts. So I hope that was helpful. That's just a quick little demonstration of Icanotes. It takes you about 2 to 3 minutes to complete your notes within Icanotes. So, all right. There. You've got some great questions in the chat, Kaylee.
Yeah,
great
absolutely. Thanks so much, October, for showing that. I think that answered a couple questions that I did see in both the chat and the Q&A. But two that I wanted to pull, I had two that I wanted to pull out with the last 5 minutes that we have. So the first question that I'm kind of pulling a couple that I received, what do you do if your client or patient cannot identify their own social supports? Meaning that they are experiencing isolation or lack of relationship to a point where they have no one. And that is very reasonable, very realistic. And it's something that when somebody is at risk for suicide, that feeling of isolation is more present than ever. So even if in somebody's more present mind, they could say like, okay, well, reasonably, I think this person might be willing to answer my call. When they're feeling so hopeless, those people disappear. And then within that same range, there is this question of rural lack of support and resources. And for both of those, I truly say and cannot speak highly enough about online and virtual resources that have become available in recent years to address kind of individuals who just genuinely lack social support and also live in such rural areas, especially individuals of the LGBTQ community who potentially live in areas where there is not resources for them to feel safe exploring. And so I would look at finding support groups that are virtual, or if somebody would prefer in person and they're just isolated, finding in-person support groups, whether that is identity-based, interest-based, situation-based. Like, it just depends on how do we manufacture relationship and social support and connection in a way where somebody is able to, in the short term, find a group of people that they feel connected to enough to stay and to be able to identify like, okay, the people in my support group are the ones that I lean on. And then additionally through rural, I would look into organizations like GLISTEN, which is specific for LGBTQ youth, as well as the Trevor Project. And they have virtual support resources that can really help that community specifically. But additionally, there are groups on the internet through American Foundation for Suicide Prevention that help kind of connect people with virtual groups. And then additionally, She Recovers is a really great resource for women and feminine presenting individuals to find identity-based support groups that they can attend weekly. They have ones for the LGBTQ, BIPOC, substance use, mental health concerns. So they really have an incredible collection of resources. So I would really reach out to them and go to their website. I will type it in the chat. Incredible group of people. And then finally, there was a question around person first language. You will note that throughout the presentation, I did not say committed suicide. And that is because I would say probably the past 10 years, we have shifted language to remove further stigma from suicide. When we say commit suicide, it indicates a criminal act, commit crime, commit suicide. And so we do change our language to say died by suicide, as a way to kind of remove the shame and guilt from those potential attempts. So I hope that was helpful in answering that question. I want to finally just thank you all so much for being here and showing an absolute commitment to suicide prevention, especially this month. But really, every month is Suicide Prevention Month. With how the world is right now, we are seeing enormous rates of suicide. And as clinicians, we have the very heavy burden and honor of walking alongside individuals who are going through that. And I want to encourage you to build your confidence and dig in and ask the questions. And you can save lives, which is incredibly powerful. So thank you all for the work that you do. And please take care.